In the Plex, How Google Thinks, Works, and Shapes Our Lives, by Steven Levy. Introduction. Imagine it's Halloween, 1998. You're a journalist, and you've arranged a meeting at a brand new, little-known startup that people are whispering about. It's supposed to have a search engine that's different, better. You drive to a nondescript building in Mountain View, California, and walk into a scene of pure, glorious chaos. There's a giant room, half-empty cubicles, and a cluster of brightly colored exercise balls scattered across the floor. But instead of the usual jeans and t-shirts, the employees are all in costume. A woman introduces you to the two young men who founded the company. One is dressed as a Viking, complete with a furry vest and a helmet with long, ridiculous antlers. The other is in a full-body cowsuit, with giant, rubbery udders on his chest. And in a small conference room, the Viking and the cow proceed to explain, with absolute seriousness, the mathematical principles behind a technology that would soon change the world. That moment, in all its absurdity and brilliance, is the perfect snapshot of the company we now know as Google. And the journalist who witnessed it, Steven Levy, would go on to spend over a decade inside the company, documenting its incredible journey. His book, In the Plex, isn't just the story of a business. It's the story of how our modern world was built, and the minds that built it. Steven Levy is one of the most respected technology writers of our time, and for this book, Google gave him access that no other journalist had ever received. He sat in on top-secret product meetings. He traveled the world with its future leaders. He was there for the arguments, the breakthroughs, and the moments of crisis. What he discovered was a company built on a single, powerful idea, that with enough data and enough computing power, you could solve almost any problem. But it was also a company built on a unique philosophy, summed up in a simple, almost childlike phrase that would become both its guiding light and its greatest burden: don't be evil. Today, we're going to step inside the Googleplex. By the end of our journey, you won't just understand how Google search works, or how the company makes its billions. You'll understand the very mindset that allowed two Stanford graduate students to build a machine that now acts as the third half of our brain, and you'll discover the secrets to their way of thinking, a way of thinking that can help you tackle any ambitious project in your own life. Book summary. Every great story starts with a problem. And in the mid-1990s, the Internet had a very big problem. The World Wide Web was this incredible, sprawling new universe of information, but finding your way around it was a nightmare. The search engines of the day, like AltaVista and Excite, were clumsy and easily fooled. They would just count how many times a word appeared on a page. So if you searched for university, you might get a page for a tiny college that just repeated the word university 100 times in its headline. The web was a library with all the books thrown on the floor, and no one knew how to build a card catalog. This was the world that two Stanford PhD students, Page and Sergey Brin, found themselves in. Larry Page was the quiet, intense visionary. He grew up in a house filled with computers. His father was a computer science professor. From a young age, Larry didn't just want to be an inventor. He wanted to change the world. He was obsessed with thinking big. If someone proposed a small solution, Larry's mind would immediately jump to the grand, audacious, seemingly impossible version of it. His heroes weren't just inventors, but inventors like Nikola Tesla, a brilliant mind who, Larry felt, had failed to commercialize his ideas and died in obscurity. Larry took a lesson from that. It wasn't enough to invent things. You had to build them at a scale that could actually impact humanity. Sergey Brin was the charismatic, playful, mathematical prodigy. Born in Soviet Russia, his family had fled the country's anti-Semitism when he was a child. The experience left him with a deep, personal appreciation for freedom and a suspicion of authoritarian systems. At Stanford, he was known for zipping through the hallways on rollerblades, but behind the goofiness was a formidable mathematical mind. These two young men, Larry and Sergey, were, as one of their colleagues put it, Montessori kids. Maria Montessori's educational philosophy is built on letting children follow their own curiosity, question authority, and figure things out for themselves. That mindset was baked into their DNA. They were always asking, why does it have to be this way? So when they looked at the mess of internet search, they asked that question. Why were search engines so dumb? They realized that all the other companies were looking in the wrong place. The answer wasn't inside the web pages themselves. The answer was in the links between the pages. In the academic world, you can tell which research papers are the most important without even reading them. You just count how many other important papers cite them. A paper cited by hundreds of other scholars is probably more significant than one cited by two. Larry Page had a flash of insight. What if the entire World Wide Web worked the same way? Every time one website linked to another, it was like a vote. It was a citation. A link from a major site like the New York Times was a more powerful vote than a link from some random personal blog. This idea, which they called PageRank, was the core of their breakthrough. They weren't just counting words, they were measuring the collective wisdom of the entire web. The web itself was telling them what was important. They called their research project Backrub, and it ran on a motley collection of cheap, mismatched computers crammed into Larry's dorm room. They begged and borrowed equipment, and set out on an insane mission to download the entire web and map out its link structure. It was a task that people told them was impossible. But Larry and Sergey just did the math and realized it was possible, just very, very hard. Their little search engine was shockingly good. It felt like magic. While other search engines were giving you random junk, Backrub was delivering the right answer, first time. They tried to sell the technology, but no one was interested. In a now legendary meeting, the CEO of Excite, one of the top search companies at the time, told them their product was too good. He explained that his business model relied on people staying on his site. Stickiness, they called it. If a search engine gave people the right answer instantly, they would leave. He wanted his search to be about 80% as good as his competitors, not light years ahead. That was the moment Larry and Sergey realized they had to build a company themselves. They couldn't trust anyone else with their creation. They renamed the project Google, a misspelling of the mathematical term Google, which is a 1 followed by 100 zeros. It was a name that reflected the scale of their ambition. And in 1998, they took a $100,000 check from an investor named Andy Bechtolsheim, written out to Google Incorporated before the company even officially existed. They couldn't cash it for weeks. Google was born. For the first few years, Google was a tiny, scrappy startup running on pure adrenaline and idealism. They moved from a garage into an office above a bicycle shop. The desks were wooden doors laid across sawhorses. The culture was forged in those early days. It was a place for engineers, built by engineers. The number one rule was to focus on the user, and everything else would follow. And there was another unwritten rule that would soon become their official motto. The story goes that in a meeting to define the company's values, a brilliant but unassuming engineer named Paul Buchheit got tired of the corporate jargon. He wanted something that would make people uncomfortable but also feel true. So he suggested a phrase, "Don't be evil." It wasn't a marketing slogan. It was a command, an internal reminder for engineers that they had a moral responsibility. In a world where other companies were tricking users and compromising their values for a quick buck, Google would be different. Another engineer, Amit Patel, started writing the phrase on whiteboards all over the office. It became the company's soul. But idealism doesn't pay for servers. By the early 2000s, Google had the best search engine in the world, but it had a problem: it wasn't making any real money. The pressure was on from their investors. At the time, online advertising was mostly about annoying, flashing banner ads. Google's founders hated them. They felt that ads, if done right, could be as useful as the search results themselves. The breakthrough didn't come from them, but from a competitor called GoTo, which had two brilliant ideas. First, instead of charging advertisers for how many people saw an ad, they charged them only when someone actually clicked on it. It was called pay per click. Second, they sold the keywords in an auction. If you wanted your ad to show up for the word flowers, you had to outbid other florists. Google saw the power of this model, but they decided to make it better, to make it googly. They brought in a quiet, brilliant mathematician named Eric Veach to design their new system, which would be called AdWords. Veach, along with a young product manager named Salar Kamangar, created a system that was pure genius. It was an auction, yes, but it wasn't just the highest bidder who won. The winner was determined by a combination of their bid and something they called a quality score. Here's how it works. Imagine three companies are bidding for the keyword hand lotion. Alice sells artisanal, high-quality lotion and bids 10 cents. Juan runs a big drugstore and bids 15 cents. Ted has a travel site and bids 50 cents, just hoping to get his ad in front of people. In a normal auction, Ted would win. But in Google's auction, Ted would probably lose. Google's system would predict that people searching for hand lotion are very unlikely to click on a travel ad. So Ted gets a very low quality score. Alice, on the other hand, sells exactly what the user is looking for. Her ad is highly relevant. She gets a very high quality score. Even though she bid less, her high quality score multiplies her bid, and she could easily end up in the top spot, paying less than everyone else. This was the magic of AdWords. It created a virtuous cycle. Advertisers were rewarded for creating relevant, useful ads. Users were happy because the ads they saw were actually helpful. And Google made a fortune. The money started rolling in so fast that Google's new CEO, Eric Schmidt, who had been brought in to provide adult supervision, instituted what he called the hiding strategy. He was terrified that if Microsoft found out how much money they were making, the giant from Seattle would wake up and try to crush them. So for years, Google's incredible profitability was its biggest secret. That river of cash changed everything. It allowed Google to fund its grand ambition, to organize all the world's information, not just what was on the web. Larry Page's old dream of scanning every book ever written was back on the table. In a top-secret project codenamed Ocean, Google started building its own revolutionary scanners and making deals with the world's biggest libraries: Michigan, Stanford, Harvard, Oxford. The plan was audacious, to create a digital card catalog for all of human knowledge contained in books. The publishing industry was horrified. They saw it as massive copyright infringement and sued. The battle over Google Books would last for years, becoming a symbol of the clash between the old world of physical information and the new world of digital access. While the book project was causing controversy, Paul Buchheit, the same engineer who came up with "Don't Be Evil," used his 20% time, Google's famous policy allowing engineers to spend 1 day a week on their own projects, to build a web-based email service. He had one core idea that seemed insane at the time. He would give users 1 gigabyte of storage. In an era when other services offered just a few megabytes, forcing you to constantly delete messages, this was revolutionary. His project, which became Gmail, was built on the philosophy, never delete another email. But Gmail also introduced another radical idea. To pay for all that storage, it would place ads next to people's emails, targeted to the content of their messages. If you were emailing a friend about hiking, you might see an ad for hiking boots. The public outcry was immediate. People felt it was creepy, a shocking invasion of privacy. It was Google's first major collision with the public over the very data that made its services so powerful. All of these new products, books, Gmail, and dozens of others, were powered by Google's secret weapon, its massive, global infrastructure of data centers. This was Google's cloud. While other companies bought expensive, high-end servers, Google built its own, using cheap, commodity parts. They knew that a certain percentage of them would fail, so they designed a brilliant software system that could root around failure instantly. A Google data center wasn't a collection of individual computers. It was designed to act as one single, planet-sized computer. And they built these massive, billion-dollar facilities in secret, in places like a small town in Oregon, hiding behind shell corporations to get the best deals on land and power. This infrastructure was Google's true, uncopyable advantage. It allowed them to do things at a scale and a cost that no one else could match. With this power, Google's ambitions grew. The company that had started as a search engine was now moving into every corner of the digital world. They bought a tiny startup called Android, founded by a robotics enthusiast named Andy Rubin. His vision was to create a free, open-source operating system for mobile phones that could compete with Microsoft. At Google, this project became a Trojan horse for Google's services. It was a direct challenge to the established players in the mobile world. That move put Google on a collision course with a company that had been one of its closest allies, Apple. Apple's CEO, Steve Jobs, had been something of a mentor to Larry and Sergey. Google's CEO, Eric Schmidt, even sat on Apple's board of directors. The two companies worked together to put Google Maps and YouTube on the very first iPhone. But as Google's Android plans became more ambitious, Jobs felt betrayed. He saw Android not as a friendly competitor, but as a stolen product, a direct rip-off of the iPhone's look and feel. The warm relationship turned into a bitter rivalry. At an internal meeting at Apple, Jobs reportedly vented his frustration with Google's "Don't be evil" motto. "It's bullshit," he said. Google was no longer the lovable underdog. It was a global superpower, and with that power came a new set of challenges and enemies. Nowhere was this more apparent than in China. Entering China presented Google with its greatest moral dilemma. To operate there, the company would have to censor its search results, complying with the Chinese government's demands to block information on topics like democracy, Tiananmen Square, and the Falun Gong. The decision tore the company's leadership apart. Eric Schmidt and Larry Page argued that being in China, even in a compromised way, was better than not being there at all. They believed that providing even limited access to information would be a force for good. But Sergey Brin, whose family had fled oppression in the Soviet Union, was deeply troubled. He saw it as a deal with the devil. Ultimately, they decided to enter, launching a censored search engine at google.cn. They tried to be as transparent as possible, placing a notice at the bottom of search results that said, "Some results may have been removed." But they were criticized around the world for collaborating with a repressive regime. For several years, Google tried to walk this tightrope. They built a large office in Beijing, led by a charismatic executive named Kai-Fu Lee, and tried to compete with the local search giant, Baidu. But the relationship with the government was always tense. The breaking point came in late 2009. Google discovered that it had been the target of a massive, sophisticated cyber attack originating from China. The hackers had stolen valuable intellectual property, but even more disturbingly, they had broken into the Gmail accounts of Chinese human rights activists. For Sergey Brin, this was the final straw. He had been outvoted on the original decision to enter China, but now he argued with all his moral force that Google could no longer be complicit. The company, he insisted, had to stop censoring. After weeks of intense, emotional debate, he won. Larry Page sided with him, and a reluctant Eric Schmidt agreed. In January 2010, Google made a stunning announcement. It would no longer censor search results in China. It effectively pulled its search engine out of the mainland, redirecting users to its uncensored site in Hong Kong. It was an unprecedented move for a major American corporation, a moment when "Don't be evil" was more than just a motto, it was a billion-dollar decision. Just as Google was grappling with these global challenges, a new threat was emerging closer to home. It wasn't another search engine, it was a new way of organizing information altogether. It was called social networking. Companies like Facebook were built on a different premise. They believed that the most important information didn't come from algorithms, but from your friends. What your social circle was talking about, sharing, and liking was more relevant than what a machine told you was important. This was a philosophical threat to Google's very existence. Worse, Facebook was a walled garden. Google's web crawlers couldn't get inside to index its vast, growing universe of personal data. Google had fumbled its own early attempts at social networking. A service called Orkut had been a massive hit in Brazil and India but a flop everywhere else. Another, called Dodgeball, a location-based social service, languished from neglect inside the company. Its founder, Dennis Crowley, would leave and start a successful competitor, Foursquare. Google was now in the uncomfortable position of chasing taillights. They launched a product called Google Buzz, which was integrated into Gmail. It was supposed to be Google's answer to Twitter and Facebook, but it was a privacy disaster right from the start. By default, it publicly revealed the people you emailed most frequently, exposing private connections and causing a massive backlash. Google had to scramble to fix it, but the damage was done. The story of Google, as Steven Levy tells it, is the story of a company that grew up. It went from being a brilliant, idealistic, and slightly naive teenager to a powerful, complex, and sometimes conflicted adult. It changed the world, just as its founders had dreamed. But it also learned that changing the world is a messy business. The company that was born from a desire to make things simple and accessible had become a sprawling empire, fighting wars on multiple fronts, against Apple in phones, Microsoft in search, and Facebook for the future of the web itself. And all the while, it had to constantly look over its shoulder, defending itself against governments, regulators, and critics who now saw it not as a force for good, but as a power to be feared. The Viking and the cow were no longer in a dorm room. They were at the head of one of the most powerful companies in human history, facing a world that was far more complicated than any algorithm could ever calculate. Commentary. When you step back and look at the story of Google, it's easy to get lost in the technology, the algorithms, the data centers, the incredible engineering. But what Steven Levy reveals so powerfully in the Plex is that Google's real secret isn't technical. It's psychological. It's a story about a specific way of thinking. It's the Montessori kid mindset that Larry and Sergey brought to every problem, a relentless questioning of why things are the way they are, and a healthy disregard for the word impossible. When everyone else was trying to make search 10% better, they asked what it would take to make it 10 times better. That question forced them to throw out all the old assumptions and invent something entirely new. This is, I think, the most powerful lesson in the book. So often, we limit our own ambitions by the perceived constraints of the world around us. We accept the way things are because that's the way they've always been. Google's story is a testament to the power of starting from first principles, of using logic and data not just to improve, but to reinvent. But it's also a cautionary tale. Google's greatest strength, its unwavering faith in data and algorithms, also became its greatest blind spot. The company was brilliant at understanding systems, but it sometimes struggled to understand people. The privacy controversies around Gmail, Buzz, and Street View all stemmed from the same place, a failure to appreciate the emotional, human context of the data they were handling. They saw information as bits and bytes to be organized, not as the delicate fabric of people's lives. And their motto, "Don't be evil," which started as such a pure, internal guide for engineers, became a public relations trap. It set a standard that no company, let alone one of Google's size and complexity, could ever perfectly live up to. As the company grew, the world learned that evil is a lot harder to define than a simple algorithm. Is it evil to censor search in China if it means giving 1 billion people access to a little more information? Is it an invasion of privacy to show someone a useful ad? These are not engineering problems, they are deeply human ones. So, what can we take away from this incredible story? Here are a few simple ideas. First, cultivate a healthy disregard for the impossible. The next time you face a big challenge, don't just ask how you can improve the current solution. Ask what a solution would look like if you started from scratch, with no constraints. You might be surprised where that question leads you. Second, fall in love with the problem, not your solution. Google was successful because its founders were obsessed with the problem of information access. They were willing to throw out their own ideas and start over if the data showed a better way. Stay flexible, stay curious, and be willing to be proven wrong. And third, find your own "don't be evil." It doesn't have to be a corporate motto. It can be a personal one. What is the one principle you won't compromise on? In a world that is constantly pushing and pulling you in different directions, having a clear moral compass is the most powerful tool you can have. It's what guides you when the data isn't enough. We've explored the grand saga of Google today, from its idealistic birth to its complicated adulthood. But Steven Levy's book is packed with so many more incredible stories and insights that we couldn't possibly cover. A summary can give you a bird's-eye view of the landscape, but reading the book is like exploring it on foot, discovering the hidden paths and unexpected vistas for yourself. If today's journey has sparked your curiosity about the minds that built the digital world we all live in, I can't recommend In the Plex enough. It's more than just a business book. It's a manual for how to think big and a profound look at the responsibility that comes with changing the world. You can find a link to it in the description below. And if you found this story valuable, and it helped you understand our world a little better, please consider subscribing to the channel. We journey into the minds of the world's greatest thinkers every week, and I'd be honored to have you join us for the next one. Let's continue to learn and grow together.